Korea. This calls for an excellent translator. Who could be better suited than the Reverend Moon's second daughter, Dr. In-Jin Moon? Will you kindly rise and join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, the Reverend Moon, and his daughter, the Reverend In-Jin Moon.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction and for all of you attending here this evening.
지금 말씀 주신 내용은 혁명적인 선택의 말씀이기 때문에 이것이 인간적인 말씀을 하지 말고 영성과 기도 가운데서 하나님께 존수하는 말씀이기 때문에 속죄하는 마음으로 기도하는 마음으로 요구하고 결론을 내야 됩니다.
The content of the message that I'm about to share with you is a revolutionary message, so please do not hear it with earthly ears. But since it is a product of deep meditation and prayer, I hope that you can receive it with an open heart.
그럼 지금부터 말씀을 해보자고요. 존경하는 내 귀인 전영하신 신사숙녀 여러분,
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen,
오늘날 역사적 대변혁 시대를 맞이하여 레브런 문과 여러분
I sincerely thank God that you and I can meet at this significant time in our history. We face an era of great historical change, yet we should know that God's will does not change. God is singular, absolute, unchanging, and eternal. God's origin, purpose, and process of creation, as well as his cause, effect, and direction, are all absolute. If Adam and Eve had become one body under the love of God, his ideal of creation could have been completely and perfectly fulfilled. Tragically, Adam and Eve ignored God's command and fell away from God and into chaos. This ignorance and chaos has expanded from the individual level to the levels of family, nation, and world. It has been the task of religion and God's providence of salvation to liberate us from this fall. In the last days, the Messiah comes to complete the will of God. He comes to teach mankind clearly about God as the absolute, unchanging, and eternal cause, and about the direction of his providence. He will cleanse the world of ignorance and chaos and return it to the original bosom of God. If, however, God's will cannot be completed, then in the last days, all religions, ideologies, and nations will perish. In just a few years, humankind will enter the new historical era of the third millennium. At this important time, I would like to offer a view of the principle of the providential history of salvation, so that we can prepare ourselves for the challenges of the new era. To bring about a perfect and complete relationship between God and humankind, centering on true love, God required that his children accomplish a condition of responsibility in order to reach unity with him. God gave a commandment to the first ancestors. While they were in the process of growing to maturity, God established the commandment as the condition for His children to inherit the most precious thing, true love. True love is not something that can be learned through words, a written text, or schooling. It can only be gained through life experience and understood through internal realization. Created as newborn infants, Adam and Eve were to grow and perfect themselves throughout their life, experiencing the heart of true children, true brothers and sisters, true husband and wife, and true parents.
참 부모의 심정을 체험하면서 완성해야 되었습니다. 하나님의 참 사랑을
Only after experiencing the true love of God can one perfect the purpose of creation and become an ideal human being. Everyone desires that their object of love be 10 million times or infinitely more valuable than themselves. Likewise, God desires that humankind, His object of love, become infinitely valuable. If we perfect ourselves, then we come to share in God's divinity and perfection. Although God is absolute, His ideal of true love cannot be realized alone. Love requires a beloved. At this point, let us explore the relationship between God's love and human love. What would have happened if God had not chosen human beings as His absolute objects of true love? God and man would have pursued the ideal of true love with different motivations, directions, and purposes.
두 사람의 방향과 목적은 다를 수밖에 없게 됩니다.
God would have had to achieve His ideal of love through an object higher than humankind. And by the same token, humankind's ideal of love would have had no direct relationship with God. God, however, established humankind as the object of His true love. Accordingly, God can fulfill His ideal of true love only through humankind. The fulfillment of God's purpose of creation is the ideal world where God and mankind are united through absolute love. Human beings were created as the greatest object of God's love. They alone in all creation embody the nature of God. They are born as the visible bodies of the invisible God. A perfected person becomes the temple of God, a visible, substantial body in which God can freely and peacefully dwell. God's overall ideal of absolute true love is realized and perfected through humankind in a vertical parent-child relationship. God created Adam first. He was to be the Son of God and at the same time the substantial body of God Himself. God created Eve as the partner of Adam so that Adam and Eve could perfect the ideal of horizontal love, which is conjugal love. Eve was also to be the daughter of God, and also as a bride, she was to perfect substantially the ideal of the horizontal love of God. The place which Adam and Eve are perfected, consummating their first love by marrying under God's blessing, is precisely the place where God meets His substantial bride. This is because God's ideal of absolute love descends vertically and joins where the ideal of conjugal love between Adam and Eve is realized horizontally. The true love of God and the true love of humankind join and perfect themselves at the same point, although they come from different directions.
하나님의 창조는 필연적입니다.
God's act of creation was inevitable,
가상할 수 없습니다.
and we cannot imagine that He created without a purpose.
이유는 단 하나.
There was only one reason why God needed the creation, and that was to realize the ideal of true love. God developed from the simplest and lowest levels up to human level in complementary pairs to form reciprocal relationships under the ideal of love. The creation's ultimate ideal of love and God's ultimate ideal of love are not separate or different. In the beginning, God created one man and one woman, Adam and Eve, in order to perfect the absolute love of God through the perfection of a love of man and woman in the human world. God's purpose of creation required that Adam and Eve obey the commandment of God, who is the subject of true love, and perfect themselves as a true man and a true woman. Furthermore, they were to become a true couple, united in the true love of God. Then by having sons and daughters, they would have become true parents and lived in happiness. Had Adam and Eve perfected themselves in true love, they would have fulfilled God's desire to dwell within His children. And when they perfected themselves as a couple, the ideal of God's absolute love would have been fulfilled. By Adam and Eve having children of goodness and becoming true parents, God would have established Himself substantially as the eternal parent and achieved His ideal. Citizenship in the kingdom of heaven would expand infinitely into the spirit world based on generations of descendants of the physical world. But Adam and Eve fell away from God. They were expelled from Eden before they had children, and their marriage was never blessed by God. Thus, the entire human race has descended from our failed ancestors. Humanity has multiplied without any direct relationship whatsoever to the love of God. Ladies and gentlemen, would the fall of man have been the result of eating the fruit of the tree? No. The fall of Adam was an immoral sin against the ideal of the true love of God. The fact that Adam and Eve were still expected to obey the commandment indicates that they fell in a stage of imperfection or immaturity. The archangel tempted Eve to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and she fell spiritually. She later tempted Adam, who was also too immature, to eat of the fruit, and they fell physically. Only the sin of illicit love could have destroyed Adam and Eve's close relationship with God. The first sexual union of man and woman was supposed to have been the perfection of love of God. It should have marked the beginning of celebration that would have continued throughout history, filling God, Adam and Eve, and the entire universe with a never-ending intoxication of joy and establishing the love, life, and lineage of God within humankind. Instead, Adam and Eve covered their lower parts and hid themselves among the tree, trembling in fear. By disobeying heavenly law, they established an immoral relationship as the basis of false love, false life, and false lineage. As descendants of Adam and Eve, all human beings are born with original sin, and our societies have become filled with tainted love. Fallen man's inability to resolve the conflict between the desires of the mind and the desires of the body in each of us causes us to commit acts that contradict our original minds. According to God's plan, all love relationships in the animal and plant kingdoms are for reproduction only. Human beings, as the sole exception, enjoy freedom in the conjugal love relationship. This is humanity's special privilege as the Lord of all creation. God gave the blessing of love to his son and daughter. However, true freedom comes with responsibility. When individuals insist upon practicing freedom of love without responsibility, only confusion and destruction takes place. Achieving the highest ideal of human love is only possible when one takes responsibility for love. The responsibility of love has three components. The first responsibility of love is to become a true individual. In order to attain true freedom, one must know how to cultivate and control oneself. Dominion over oneself is more than just obedience to law or social convention. Rather, a person takes responsibility for his own self-control and self-determination by achieving a vertical relationship with God. The second responsibility of love is to perfect conjugal love. By nature, people do not want their spouse's love to be shared with others. Horizontal conjugal love, which differs from the vertical love between parents and children, loses its potential for perfection the moment it is divided. This is because the principle of creation requires husband and wife to become one in absolute love.
사랑은 자기 상대를 절대로 위해야 할 사랑의 책임성이 있습니다.
Each spouse has the responsibility to give love and to live absolutely for the sake of others.
셋째는 자녀에 대한 사랑의 책임성입니다.
The third responsibility of love is to perfect parental love.
부모의 사랑입니다.
Parental love is crucial for a child's self-worth and happiness.
그러한 사랑 속에서 양육되기를 바랍니다. 부모의 자녀에 대한
All children desire to be born as a result of total and harmonious unity of their parents and raised in true love. The most precious responsibility of parents is not only to raise their children physically, but also to provide them with the kind of love that can perfect them spiritually. This is why the family is so important. The daily experience of the hearts of true children, true brothers and sisters, true spouses, and true parents cannot be acquired in any other place than in the true family. If Adam and Eve had become a couple of true love centered upon God, God would have dwelt in his children as a substantial body and thus shared their love. What is more, Adam and Eve would have become true parents who substantially embodied God as the origin of love of goodness, a life of goodness, and a lineage of goodness. Due to the fall, however, Adam and Eve became the substantial body of Satan and ended up becoming the original evil couple, evil parents, and evil ancestors. Their union became the root of evil love, evil life, and evil lineage. Because human beings originated from this root, they descended from Satan, an adulterer and enemy of God, and inherited this lineage of evil parents. Ladies and gentlemen, how great must have been the pain of God when our human ancestors destroyed his ideal of true love. Humankind should have been the sons and daughters of God, but they do not know God as their original parent. Yet even though his sons and daughters serve Satan, God has worked for the providence of salvation. God is an absolute being, and his ideal of creation is also absolute. Even amid great sadness, God continues to carry out the providence of salvation. God's providence of salvation is the providence of restoration, which means to recover the lost purpose of creation centered on true love.
이런 점에서 복귀 섬제의 근본은
Based on this point, the essence of the providence of salvation is the recreation of the seed of the original child, the human being who will fulfill the ideal of creation. That which God abhors, the life and lineage that began with the false love of the adulterer Satan, must be purified. The goal of God's providence is the task of setting up the birth of the true parents, the Savior that comes with the true life and lineage of God. Since the ancestors of humankind failed to fulfill their responsibility and came under the dominion of Satan, God could not restore human beings to their original position through direct intervention. Furthermore, God can neither unconditionally accept humankind who chose to go to the evil archangel's side, nor punish them. So God uses the strategy of having a central figure on the good archangel's side struck first by Satan's side. In this way, the central figure establishes the indemnity condition to recover what was lost. Satan strikes first, but as a result must take the losing position. The First and Second World Wars and the Cold Wars are good examples of this. From the overall perspective of the providence of restoration, the foundation of cooperation between mother and son is very important. This was so at the time of Jacob, Moses, and Jesus. God was working providentially to separate people from satanic life and lineage by establishing the foundation of cooperation between a mother and the second son of the family. God was unable to relate directly to the first son because the elder son is in the position of having a direct relationship with Satan. Thus, God has been restoring the lineage of goodness by having the second son, representing the side of goodness, establish a condition of indemnity, and by having the first son, representing the side of evil, take a position subordinate to the second son. In Adam's family, God tried to carry out the providence of having the second son Abel win over the first son Cain. Fallen Eve, as a mother, had the role of creating unity between the two brothers. In the end, however, Cain murdered Abel, and the providence of salvation not being fulfilled was prolonged. There was also a required formula of cooperation between mother and son at the time of Noah. The formula of meaningful cooperation was not realized until the time of Rebekah and Jacob. To understand the providential roles of Rebekah and Jacob, let us take a moment to analyze the fall of man. The archangel seduced Eve, causing the spiritual fall, and later, fallen Eve seduced Adam, causing the physical fall. As a result, they turned their backs on God, and the fallen archangel became Satan. Since the providence of salvation is the providence of restoration, it is carried out by going in a direction 180 degrees opposite of the fall. God lost Adam, who had the seed of true love and true life. So God had to find a son with a new seed free from satanic accusation. According to the providence of restoration, God must prepare a son who has no relationship to the fall, just as God created Adam at the time of creation. This is the basis for the idea of the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah comes to cleanse the sinful lives of those with a fallen lineage under a dominion of Satan. He is not a Superman who comes only to work miracles. Rather, he comes as a true person who engrafts fallen humanity into the seed of new life. The Messiah has his roots in God and comes as the second Adam, wiping away all that was committed by the first Adam.
할 초인을 메시아로 보낼 수 없는 사정이 여기에 있습니다. 이 땅에 하나님의 사랑과 생명의 씨를
For a son to be born on earth with the seed of God's love and life, there must first exist a mother. And because the act of love and conception was tainted by the fall, the mother cannot give birth to this child in a conventional way. Conception must happen through the formula of restoration. All the cooperation between mothers and sons in the providence of restoration was a preparatory condition for the Son of God to be born. By making conditions to avoid Satan's attacks, and by subordinating the first son, who symbolically represents evil, mother and son restore the love, life, and lineage that were taken over by Satan. The Bible, which records the providential works of God, contains many stories that are difficult to understand. For example, Rebekah deceived her husband Isaac and her first son Esau, and helped her second son Jacob receive the blessing. God took the side of that mother and son, and although they used methods that at first glance seem unjust, God still blessed them for their actions. In Adam's family, Cain and Abel fought outside the womb. Their struggle resulted in the death of Abel, the second son. Then came Jacob. On the merits of many godly people who paid indemnity and sacrificed after the time of Abel, Jacob at last caught up to the level at which Satan first dominated humankind. At the ford of Jabbok, Jacob set up the condition of spiritual victory by wrestling with an angel, and through winning over Esau, who was in the position of the archangel, Jacob consequently was blessed as the first victor in history and was given the name Israel. But by then, he was already in his 40th year. Satan sowed the seed of false love within the womb of Eve, which gave birth to evil life. Therefore, God needed to purify a mother's womb from which the heavenly Son could be born. That purification period of separation from Satan had to begin at the time of conception and continue to age 40. Even though Jacob was victorious, he did not meet that criteria. The great mother who assumed the responsibility to meet this condition was Tamar. Tamar had married the eldest son of Judah, but displeased God and he died. According to the custom of the time, Judah gave Tamar his second son Onan, that they may bear a child for But Onan, knowing that Tamar's child would not be his own, spilled his semen on the ground. This was a sin in the eyes of God, for which Onan died. Then Tamar wanted Shelah, the third son of Judah, for a husband, but Judah did not give him to her. Judah thought that his two sons had died because of Tamar. He was afraid that Shelah would die and end the family lineage. Tamar, however, had the conviction that she was to carry on the lineage of the chosen people. To do that, she disguised herself as a prostitute and slept with her father-in-law Judah and became pregnant with twins. At the time of birth, one of the twin sons, Zerah, stretched out his hand from the womb to be born first. But he was pulled back into the womb, and the second son, Perez, was born first, taking the position of the elder brother. Thus, within the womb of Tamar, the first and second sons fought, and the reversal of their positions separated them from Satan. That became the condition for a mother's womb to be free from satanic accusation and worthy to conceive the Son of God. Upon this condition, the Messiah could be conceived within the lineage of Israel, the chosen people.
국가적 승리의 터전이 조성된 것입니다. 이러한 기반 후에
In this way, Mother Mary emerged in the mainstream of God's providence.
요셉과 결혼 약혼한 마리아는
Mary, when she was engaged to Joseph, received from the archangel Gabriel the surprising message that the Messiah would be born through her. In those days, unmarried pregnant women were condemned to death. But Mary accepted the will of God with absolute faith, saying, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word."
마리아는 친척이요 존경받는 대제사장
Mary consulted with Zachariah, who was her relative and a highly respected priest. At the same time, Zachariah's wife, Elizabeth, was pregnant with John the Baptist. She said to Mary, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Why is this granted to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" These words testified to the coming birth of Jesus. God let Mary, Zachariah, and Elizabeth know about the birth of the Messiah before anybody else. All of them had the absolutely crucial mission of following the will of God and serving Jesus. Zachariah's family let Mary stay in their house. Jesus was conceived in the house of Zachariah. Elizabeth and Mary were cousins on their mother's side. But according to God's providence, they were considered sisters, with Elizabeth as the elder and Mary as the younger. Mary received Elizabeth's help in the presence of Zachariah. Through this cooperation, Zachariah's family indemnified the lack of unity on the national level that did not exist in Jacob's family between Leah and Rachel. This allowed Jesus to be conceived. For the first time in history since the fall of man, the seed of the Son of God, the seed of the true Father, could be born on earth free from satanic accusation. Jesus, therefore, is the only begotten Son of God and the owner of the first love of God. Mary, Elizabeth, and Zachariah were spiritually moved. They followed the revelation that came from God and unconditionally believed that it was the will and desire of God. Mary, nevertheless, still had to achieve something that could not be understood by common sense, nor easily tolerated under the law of those times. Although the Son of God could be born on earth, he needed a wall of protection to grow up safely in the satanic world and fulfill the will of God. God had hoped that these three people in the family of Zachariah would establish that protective foundation. We must prayerfully consider whether Mary, Elizabeth, and Zachariah accomplished all that they were to do in serving the Son of God. The Bible says in Luke 1:56, "And Mary remained with her about 3 months and returned to her home." After that, there is no biblical record of any further communication between Mary, Elizabeth, and Zachariah. From the time Mary left Zachariah's house, difficulties began for Mary and Jesus. The family of Zachariah should have been the wall of protection for Jesus until the very end. Eventually, Joseph discovered that Mary was pregnant. His shock at that moment must have been great. Mary, his beloved fiancée, had become pregnant after a 3-month stay in another place.
태네의 누구의 아들을
It was natural for Joseph to question Mary about the baby.
당연한 일이었습니다. 그때 만일 마리아가 정직하게 얘기해 버렸다면
What would have
무슨
happened
일이
if
벌어지겠습니까?
Mary had explained everything
만일
candidly?
밝힌 날은 일적이
If she had
멸망하게 됩니다.
exposed everything,
그러므로
it would have been the end of the clan.
했다고만
Instead, Mary simply responded that she was pregnant by the Holy Spirit.
마리아의 배가 불러왔고 주의 사람들도 임신한 것을 알게
Mary's pregnancy began to show, and the people of the surrounding area became aware of it. What would have happened if Joseph had declared that he didn't know anything about it? But Joseph was a righteous man. He believed in the revelation of God and defended Mary, saying that the pregnancy was his responsibility. Mary may have been ridiculed for becoming pregnant during her engagement, but she had avoided death. Joseph, who loved Mary, protected her in the beginning. However, there was a great deal of anguish in his heart. Once Jesus was born, Joseph's doubts about the father of Jesus only increased, and his heart ached. As Jesus grew older, the two became more and more distant in heart, and family problems frequently arose. Jesus was viewed as an illegitimate son, and lacking the protection of Zacharias' family and the love of Joseph, he grew up with an indescribable loneliness in his heart. Jesus was aware of his path as the Messiah, and he lamented about the lonely circumstances and the serious obstacles presented in fulfilling the will of God. The Messiah is the true parent. In order to fulfill that mission, he needs to receive his substantial bride. Jesus had to reverse what the archangel had caused in seducing Eve, who was growing up as the sister of Adam. Consequently, Jesus, in the place of Adam and God's son, should have received as his bride the younger sister of someone in an archangelic position. That bride was to have been a daughter from Zacharias' family and a sister to John the Baptist. To fulfill this in a satanically dominated world, Jesus needed a foundation of protection of absolute faith. Tragically, the entire foundation ended up collapsing around him. This would not have happened if Zachariah and Elizabeth, who received the revelation and spiritual support from God, had maintained absolute faith. If they had fulfilled their responsibility, Mary would have been in contact with them continually, even after her 3-month stay at their house. God chose Zacharias' family as the foremost representative of the entire world, so that even after the birth of Jesus, they would protect, serve, and witness to him as the Messiah. They should have served Jesus as the Son of God and Messiah with complete devotion, and learn the will of God through Jesus and follow him completely. Moreover, John the Baptist, born to serve Jesus, should have guided everyone to believe in Jesus and receive salvation. Although Zechariah, Elizabeth, and John the Baptist testified at first to Jesus as the Son of God, there is no evidence that they served him as such. Zechariah was simply a spectator. John the Baptist stood separate from Jesus and even doubted him. These circumstances blocked the people from following Jesus and made his path very difficult. Once this family lost faith in Jesus, they did not help him receive his bride. We should also consider the influence that Joseph and Mary's relationship had on Jesus. Mary should have remained as only the fiancée of Joseph in restoring the position of Eve and Tamar through indemnity. Providentially, they were not meant to be husband and wife. It was God's desire that they not have sexual relation either before or after Jesus' birth. Joseph still loved Mary after Jesus was born, but Mary should have separated from Joseph to raise Jesus as the Son of God. But the real circumstances did not make this easy to do. Mary lived with Joseph as his wife, even though her original mind told her that she should not do so. When they had children, they repeated Eve's mistake, and this condition allowed Satan to invade them. All of those whom God had prepared to protect Jesus came under the dominion of Satan. His mother, Zachariah and his children, and Joseph and his children. When someone is invaded by Satan, he loses all spiritual support and inspiration. There is no trust in God or a sense of gratitude to Him. One begins to see everything from an earthly point of view. Mary did not help Jesus with the wedding he desired. She even opposed it. This was the reason why Jesus could not receive his bride and could not become the true parents. He was forced to go the way of the cross. Jesus' words to Mary during the wedding at Cana, "O woman, what have you to do with me?" John 2:4, reveal a reproachful heart to a mother who helped in the weddings of others, but neglected to help Jesus receive his bride. With this perspective, we can now understand why Jesus asked, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Faced with the opposition of Mary, Zachariah, Elizabeth, and John the Baptist, Jesus gave up hope for their protection as he sought to fulfill his mission. Jesus had no other choice but to leave his home in search of a new spiritual foundation to restart the providence of salvation. Now, without a family and household, Jesus lamented, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Matthew 8:20. During Jesus' 3-year ministry, he sought to replace his family-level foundation. In the end, as people disbelieved and the disciples lost faith, Jesus took on Satan's attack. As his foundation crumbled, he went the way of the cross. Originally, Jesus came to earth to find his bride, establish true parentship, and give the marriage blessing to his disciples and all humankind. He was to build the sinless kingdom of heaven, but because the lack of faith in him, he could not receive his bride. He could not become the true parents. This is why he promised to return. The Lord of the Second Advent comes to perfect the foundation of God's providence of restoration left uncompleted by Jesus. He comes as the seed of the original true child to complete the ideal of creation. He comes to complete the ideal of true parents, who are the origin of true love, life, and lineage of God. He comes on the foundation of all the victories achieved by God's side up to the time of Jesus. He comes to stand upon Jesus' victorious foundation and find the bride that Jesus could not find. Together, they become the true parents to save all humankind. Through the blessing of new marriages that pass on God's original lineage, true parents will be able to give salvation to all humanity. People will become true persons, engrafting into the true love, true life, and true lineage of God. Furthermore, the Messiah will establish a true family, creating the kingdom of heaven on earth. International holy weddings will establish this new lineage when the Lord of the Second Advent comes in the flesh.
아담 한 가정에서 잃어버린 것을 세계
On the level of the great worldwide family, the Lord indemnifies all that was lost in the family of Adam and restores the elder sonship, true parentship, and true kingship that should have been perfected in Adam's family. He will transform this world into the kingdom of heaven on earth under the dominion of God, opening the kingdom of heaven in the spirit world. Humanity will establish a world of victory, freedom, happiness, and unity, and create heavenly kingdom on earth and in the spirit world as God's ideal of creation.
이것이 구원 섭리사의 원리관입니다.
This is the view of the principle of the providential history of salvation.
여러분들도 미래의 행복한 새로운 결혼 축복을
In the near future, I invite all of you to receive this joyous new marriage blessing.
경애하는 이 나라 지도자 그리고 내외 귀빈 여러분.
Distinguished leaders and honored guests, I would like to express again my deepest appreciation to you for coming here this evening to celebrate the inauguration of the Washington Times Foundation. In particular, I sincerely congratulate those of you being honored as the first recipients of the Washington Times Foundation National Service Award. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Moon. Can I ask Reverend Moon and Dr. Injin Moon to remain on the stage a moment, please? And I would like to invite Mrs. Moon, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, to join them. Reverend Moon has spoken about family values, and everything he does as a family, inviting his partner and his greatest supporter, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, and we would like to now make a floral presentation. Reverend and Mrs. Moon together have 13 children, actually a total of over 40 children and grandchildren. Please be seated. Although not all members of their family could be here this evening, I would like to ask a few of Reverend Moon's children and their in-laws who have come together to please stand up and be recognized. Please join me in welcoming the members of Reverend Moon's family. Thank you very much. Throughout American history, in times of crisis, dedicated men and women have responded to the call and met the challenges of their day. Now our country is faced with many troubles. Once again, selfless men and women are stepping forward, taking action, and finding workable solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The National Service Awards of the Washington Times Foundation have been instituted to recognize men and women across the United States who, inspired by their love of God and humanity, have selflessly given of themselves in service to others. The strength of a society lies in the character of its citizens. In an age when self-regarding individualism is promoted sometimes in the most influential quarters, it has become a serious question as to what type of character our children will inherit. The Foundation tonight comes forward with an answer recognizing those people whose worthy example can be commended to our children. The award is based on 4 criteria: promoting the integrity of the family, encouraging the peaceful resolution of conflict, contributing to the moral betterment of society, and supporting youth in the achievement of worthwhile goals. Nominations for the award, and this is an example of the award which will be given. Nominations for the award were accepted from community groups, churches, and civic organizations, and submitted for consideration to award committees that were set up in every state. Members of the committees were elected officials, ministers, and community activists. Their selections were forwarded to a 7-member national selection committee for ratification. From among all of the state awardees, 2 were chosen for outstanding commendation. And tonight we will begin by presenting the 2 national-level Community Service Awards. May I invite to the stage Mr. David Keene, Chairman of the American Conservative Union, who will make our first presentation. Mr. Keene. From the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. When those of us who were asked by the Washington Times Foundation to review the various names and organizations of people presented for consideration for these first awards, I think we were, as you always are when you sit down and look at the great sacrifices that so many people make for the betterment of our nation, our society, and for others, humbled by what we read. There were literally hundreds, many of whom are here tonight as recipients of state awards, who could just as appropriately be recognized as a recipient of a national award. But this was our first meeting. This is the first banquet sponsored by the Washington Times Foundation. The first time the National Service Awards are to be presented. And as we looked over the potential recipients of those awards, we went back time and again to the various qualities that the foundation had set about wishing to honor. And it was our considered opinion that these first awards would be vitally important because people would look to them and to the recipients of the awards to say just what is it that this is about. And so we took special pains to find recipients, to identify among the various candidates those who would most effectively, we thought, stand and reflect the values that the awards are designed to promote. You've heard them before, but I repeat them as I present this first of our national awards. Awardees are individuals who've given of themselves, who've dedicated their lives, either vocationally or avocationally, to promote the integrity of the family, to encourage the peaceful resolution of conflict, to contribute to the moral betterment of society, and to support youth in the achievement of those worthwhile goals. It was our considered opinion as we went through the potential winners of the first national award that the late Michael Landon, better than perhaps anyone else, was someone that in future years we could look to and say, this man who received one of our first awards led a life and promoted values in a way that melded his private values with his public life and his vocation to build a better society, to instill stronger traditional values in the people of our country. And it was our hope and it's our belief that in future years, as awardees are selected, they will be measured against a standard that will be hard to meet, a standard established by the late Michael Landon. All of us, some of us in our younger years, watched on television Michael Landon as an actor, as a director, of programs, all of which were popular, successful, and all of which promoted values of which we all in this room and everyone else could be proud. Contrary to some who say that that's impossible, he proved that it isn't. And there are others even today in what one might refer to as a wasteland of entertainment who are picking up and following his example. And in part, an awardee's strength is that he or she serves as an example to those who come after. Michael Landon serves as good an example as anyone could ever ask. So it's with a great deal of pleasure, if we can find the award, that I would ask Mr. Landon's daughter, Cheryl, to come up to the stage and receive on her late father's behalf the first National Service Award from the Washington Times Foundation.
Father to every show, and I couldn't think of a more appropriate time to bring him with me here tonight. In April of 1991, my father found out that he had contracted one of the deadliest forms of cancer. 2.5 months later, he left us. It was so quick and it was so very, very shocking. But if you think about it, Michael Landon represented something that each of us really is searching for, to place ourselves on a solid foundation. He was an advocate for world peace, but he stressed that in order to have world peace, we must build ourselves upon a solid foundation, and that foundation is love. He believed that he was one that could make a difference. In fact, when my father found out that he only had 3 weeks to live, it greatly disappointed him, because he had said to me during this time, you know, Cheryl, I won. I can make a difference. And he had started another show called Us, Addressing Human Relationships. And he was quoted saying, my best work is yet to come. Now, my father had such a strong theory in this power of love, and he was even quoted as saying, love, it's what lets us live on. It's the most powerful force in the universe. Don't ever take it for granted. But if only you knew that Michael Landon grew up in one of the most abusive, one of the most challenging childhoods all the way until his early adult years. He knew prejudice very well. He was poor. And he did not know the family love that he taught us. And I'm curious, how was it that a man that had every right to be angry at the world built bridges to peace? He was an amazing man because, as was said, he had the ability to touch our lives, millions of lives, in a universal language that made us feel compassion, that made us feel love. And he did this without preaching a religion or challenging our beliefs. He found this time in his life that there was a formula. It was very simple. It was built on old-fashioned basic values. A lot of that has been cut out, and it's time for us to bring it back in. My father was also one that he worked every inch of the way to get what he got, and so many times he was challenged amongst his own peers, so this award means so very much. He encouraged all of us, never give up. Never ever give up on a dream. Push yourself, spread your wings, and soar beyond where you ever think you can go. And yes, believe in the power of love, because love is the greatest key to success. It is also, still to this day, the hardest for us to live. Personally, Michael Landon was the best father I could have ever hoped to have. He was one of my best friends, and I must also pay respect to my mother, Lynn. She was his backbone. She was with him for 20 years, and she was his greatest inspiration to giving us the family television shows that you saw. She is a magnificent woman, and that's why she is a part of this award tonight, too. Why Dad left us so early, I don't know, but I will tell you this. God is alive, and God does work in very mysterious and deliberate ways. This I know. My father was taken, I don't know why, except for he left us a torch to carry on, a torch that each one of us can do and live tonight. And it unites us here today. And I must say this, that I would like to pay right now great honor to you, Reverend and Mrs. Moon. Thank you so very much for giving us in the way that you do, to the Washington Times and the founders, and to the Women's Federation for World Peace. I have to say one quick thing. About the Women's Federation for World Peace. It was about this time last year that I was invited to deliver a seminar and to cross the bridge. I was so moved by this bridge crossing, so moved by the women and the people involved that I became the first speaker to become a member of Women's Federation, and I'm still very active in that today. They are some of my best friends, and I'd like to thank all the volunteers, the staff members, and I would like to say that love is truly what joins us here tonight. My work is dedicated on a promise that really began 23 years ago when my father was at my deathbed. I just didn't know that years later the roles would be reversed and I'd be at my dad's deathbed. It was at this time that my father, when I was the one who was dying, he had made a promise to God in return for my life, and that promise is what is giving us the shows that you have seen. They're all based on loving one another. It's all based on carrying positive messages so that our children may have a healthy generation. You all here tonight, you're great contributors. This award is really meant in a special way to me, but I want to honor all of you because there are people here in this audience that you're awesome. And I congratulate all of you and thank you for being contributors, and it represents renewal, a commitment so that we can have world peace. And I am dedicating my efforts in carrying on this torch that my dad left to us so that we can protect and enhance our greatest resource, our most precious resource, and that is our children. They must be protected. If my dad were here tonight, I know he would say, thank you, and how much he loves you in return for this award. And in ending, I'd like to thank all of you. And I'd like to hold this up and say, Dad, we really miss you. So thank you, and domo arigato gozaimashita, sayonara.
Thank you very much, Cheryl Landon. Our second national level award will be presented by Dr. Richard Rubenstein, President of the University of Bridgeport. Dr. Rubenstein.
Reverend and Mrs. Moon, distinguished and honored guests, it is my high privilege to present the Washington Times National Service Award to Mrs. Carolyn A. Wolf, the founder and executive director of the St. Gerard Home and School in St. Augustine, Florida, America's oldest city, a city in which Mrs. Wolf has told me Mass was said for the first time on the American continent. Mrs. Wolf has been selected to receive the Washington Times Foundation National Service Award with special recognition for her 33 incomparable years of service to teens in trouble. She has spent her life helping children. She and her husband raised 5 of their own